If you're just joining us, welcome to Best Practices for Synchronous Online Sessions. We're going to go ahead and get started with the workshop. So I do have a couple of different goals for you today, as well as just a rough sketch of an agenda. I do want to discuss the limitations and also the strengths of synchronous sessions. I want to discuss ideas for intentional lesson planning, particularly for those of you who are either teaching a synchronous session now or planning to in the future. And then I always like to add in some strategies for using technology to help foster interactions. So I want to make sure it's not all just theory. I want to give you some practical application tips. So some of the things that we're going to be doing is we'll explore the challenges that come up with synchronous sessions. We're going to talk a little bit about pre-planning, breakout group exercises, things that you can do, some other activities for online courses, and then, of course, as promised, I'll pepper in some of those tech tools. Okay, so now I get to know all of you. If you want to go ahead, you can introduce yourself in the chat. I know normally your name comes up, although sometimes our computers give us wrong names. So you just want to tell us your name, your role at NIU. If you're a teacher, what do you teach? And choose an emoji to convey your mood.
Hi everyone, my name is Mark Joe. I'm an instructor with Mathematical Sciences Department and I teach undergrad math.
Excellent. Welcome, Mark Joe.
Thank you, Megan.
I'm so excited. I took a glance at our roster here, and it looks like we've got some different disciplines in here. So this always makes it a kind of a fun workshop. I included my frozen emoji for you. I don't know if anybody else is on campus today, but I went out on my lunch break and it started to hail. All right, I hope I pronounced this correctly. It's this Nusret, and you're a PhD student in biological sciences.
Yeah, you are correct.
Excellent. Welcome. All right, there may be still a few of you typing in the chat. Brandon Perez, assistant professor in special and early education. You coordinate behavior analysis program, which is fully online synchronous. Excellent. That's very exciting. All right, I hope I have some good tips for you today. All right, I'm actually going to skip the whiteboard. Let's just go with the chat since everybody already found the chat. So ignore that previous slide about the whiteboard. But I do have a question for all of you. So many of us, start out teaching face to face in a regular traditional classroom environment. And then when we switch to online teaching, we kind of move into this synchronous online session modality, but they aren't necessarily the same. So and this is just in your opinion, how are synchronous online sessions different than, teaching face to face? Welcome, Christine. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. And again, if you prefer not to type, feel free to hop on the microphone. As you're thinking about this, I know many of us, kind of made it through emergency remote teaching during the pandemic. If you were a student at that time, you can also incorporate that kind of into your perspective. Mr. I agree. Yes, you can be at home, comfortable in your own setting. Brandon has pointed out you can't read body language and level of engagement as easily. Yes, even when you have webcams turned on, people are kind of frozen in one little square. Yes. Students sometimes refuse to have their video on, hence no face expressions to guide your instruction. Yeah, absolutely. I like that there's, some things that you've enjoyed and there's some things that you're struggling with here. These are some great answers. Building community is different, but you can save on travel. Very nice. Okay, I wanted to share with you some of the things that others have stated. So, and some of these are being echoed in. I see your own responses that are coming in through the chat. So, one of the common complaints we hear is you cannot easily read body language. You're not physically observing their work, right? You're not walking around the classroom and watching what they're doing. It does require extensive pre-planning. If there's one thing that I have learned about online instruction, it's that you can't just do things off the cuff. It requires a lot of pre-planning. No walk-in office hours. Usually they're virtual and online. And people sometimes report feeling isolated. Now, down here at the bottom of this screen, you'll see a quote, and this is actually from someone out of the University of Arkansas. And they were describing their face-to-face course. And they said, well, I've been teaching this course so long that I don't have to really plan anything out. I just check where I left off during the last class period and move on. And that's very atypical of online synchronous courses. It's almost actually the exact opposite. So I just thought you might find that a little bit interesting. So we know that these are some of the challenges. Is there anything we can do to overcome them? And what do we have to do when we're planning our courses in advance? So I wanted to start you off actually with this picture, not of this man's head. I apologize. That ended up in there just because. But this is actually one of the earlier lecture halls that we've ever seen. And the reason I've included this picture here is because a lot of times when we talk about teaching, we talk about leading a classroom. And it really goes back to some of our earliest forms of formal education. And it was this idea that one person was speaking, they were leading the class, and students surrounded them, and they were supposed to be almost like sponges. They were there to absorb the knowledge. And now classrooms are really taking a different approach. And so, one of the ways that you may want to think of how to plan your course is to think about your own role. And I would encourage you, instead of just thinking of yourself as leading a class, I would encourage you to think of yourself as a facilitator, hence the typical online classroom. Kind of like you're setting the stage, you're preparing the environment for optimal student success. So as you can see, our classrooms really have changed quite a bit, right? There's not just one person that's the central focus. Maybe we have little tiles of people or just names if they don't turn on their cameras. So when you start to begin your lesson plan as a facilitator, as the instructor, I would say ask yourself four very specific questions. Have a goal. What will my students be able to do by the end of this lesson? So give yourself kind of some mini goals or objectives. Try to list out every activity that they can do asynchronously. It's okay to ask your students to complete tasks before they come to class. Your time with them is very limited, so you want to make the most of it together. So, what are some things that they could do asynchronously? They could do reading before they come to class. They could watch recorded lectures. And that way, instead of going through PowerPoint lectures during your synchronous course, now you can work on group activities. So, do you have podcasts? Is there anything like that that they can do? Um, so think about those questions. Kind of hand in hand with that, we just talked about what can they do asynchronously, is how can I minimize lecture time and passenger syndrome? So this is tough, but we know that if students can sit through a synchronous session silently, they will. So we really want to empower students, and we really want to change that dynamic. So one of the ways that you can do that is to put kind of students in charge of the learning process. And I have some tips for how to do that coming up. Also, what are my interaction requirements? So when we think of interaction, you can think about, how do students engage with you? How do they engage with their peers? And how do they engage with your course content? So those are the four big questions. Now, here's some of the specific things that you can do as you're preparing your lesson plan. Post an agenda for your students. Build in there some breaks, because we know that students have a shorter attention span. Everybody does, and it seems to be impacted in a virtual environment. So let them know, when are they going to have a break, a 10-minute break. Assign those pre-synchronous session activities that we were talking about. So did they need to read something out of the book? Or do you have some recorded lectures that they need to watch? Now, one of my mentors always said, if you have an activity, you must have some sort of follow-up assignment. Otherwise, students will consider it optional. So if you need them to read something out of the textbook, make sure you have some type of, maybe like a reading quiz or something where they have to demonstrate that they have read the required material. Same thing for recorded lectures. If you build that in, then students will know they're being held accountable for those activities. I also like to use pre and post surveys for a course. And this can be a lot of fun. There's different ways that you can deploy this, but you might ask students at the start of a class, before you've taught the lesson, before you've given them the knowledge that they need, ask them to try to solve a problem. See how far they get. You can table it, teach the lesson, show students how to solve the problem, and ask them to revisit that same question at the end of class. Now, do they have the necessary knowledge to solve the problem once they participated in said activity? We're going to talk more about student-led activities, but again, we're getting kind of into this idea of the flipped classroom environment. And I think sometimes that becomes a bit of a buzzword, but it's really this idea that students are actually leading the lesson plan. So they are actively, involved. They're discussing things, they're explaining things, they're presenting, they're doing all sorts of activities where they don't just sit there quietly with their webcams turned off. And I encourage you to really just take the initiative and assign specific tasks to your students. So that way everybody knows that they play a central role in your course. Okay. So I bounce around quite a bit in these workshops where I try to give you, some of the technical details, or in this case, I think I called it the logistics. But these are some things that you can do ahead of time so that the time that you have together in a synchronous session is well used. This is, one of those things, you don't want to be fumbling with your technology when you only have an hour together. So if you want students to look at a particular document Make sure that you save that document to a shared folder. And I like to use SharePoint or the shared drive. But you can share the documents in the chat before you end up putting your students into breakout groups. Now, the reason I like to do this is because sometimes I've tried in the past, I had all my documents in a folder in my Blackboard course, and then I told my students to get into a group and then go look for the folder in the Blackboard course. They spent more time trying to find the document than actually, working on the coursework. So I like to have shareable links ready ahead of time. I also like to try to plan the groups ahead of time. And you don't have to get fancy with this, but just kind of do an inventory. How many students are enrolled in your course? If you have 25 students enrolled in your course, 4 to 5 students, per group might be ideal for you. So, roughly you're thinking you're going to have 5 groups. That'll save you a lot of time. Sometimes you want your students to work on a document in their little breakout groups. So you can save a document, one per group, right? Even if they're all working on the same project, I'm going to save that document 5 different times. I'm going to save it as group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, and group 5. And I'm going to put the links in the chat. And then when they go into their breakout groups, they just click on their appropriate link. When you have students in your course working on something, any type of a project, ask them to submit their work, that documents their workflow. It's not necessarily what answer they arrived at, it's how they got there. So this kind of, again, shows them that we need to see you document your thought process. And I did put in here the alternative is yes, you can have students use their documents located in the Blackboard class, but it has been my experience that this is actually very time consuming and it sucks up valuable minutes where they could have actually been doing something productive. Questions on any of that so far? Okay. So again, if you want to type in the chat or you can use your microphone, I have 2 questions for you. You can probably pick one and just label it so we know which one you're answering. How do you measure and assess student engagement in an online synchronous session? And the second one, how do you provide feedback in your synchronous sessions? No right or wrong answers. Sometimes people have some really creative ideas floating around. Great. I see some answers coming in. I know it takes a second for you to type. Comments. Sounds like maybe verbal comments. Try to make it with humor, add some levity to the course. Absolutely. It is a perk of having adult learners. We can all laugh and smile together. Use shared documents, share outs and debriefs. Hmm. Using Pear Deck during the class. I'm not sure I know what that one is, but I would love to learn more. Does anybody else use Pear Deck? Oh, Jill, I might have to pick your brain about that one. I always love learning more tech. All right, well, let's see if I can give you a couple of other ideas here. So, to kind of get back to this idea, like how do we provide feedback? How do we measure engagement? All these things. We have to get into really the pedagogy of a synchronous session and the breakout groups. So, what are these things and what can they do? Well, they can help us create connections and facilitate collaboration. Your students could be anywhere, like you said, right? They could do it from the comfort of their own home. I've been in courses with active military who are overseas and, in a different country. So it does really help us to create these connections with our peers who we haven't yet maybe met. It also humanizes the learning experience. Even just, a brief weekly session, they can see your face or hear your voice. They can interact with people who have different perspectives. So it is really just humanizing that online experience. It does also help with building experience, helping students problem solve, and brainstorming. So these are all the potential benefits of a synchronous session, assuming we have specific goals for our students. Oh, thank you so much, Jill. I appreciate you sharing the link. I can't wait to look at it. So I do want to move on for just a second here, but how are some other ways that we can provide feedback to our students? Well, I have some stuff coming up here. I'm going to give you some specific tips and ideas. I think a lot of times we will verbalize, our feedback in a synchronous session because we have a microphone. But there are other ways that we can provide feedback to our students. Some students prefer online courses, maybe because they're a little bit more introverted. So there are other ways that you can reach out to them. So I'm going to kind of start reaching into that in just a moment here. And it does go hand in hand with breakout room activities. So I think a lot of times we all know what breakout rooms are. Thanks to the pandemic, we've all been in a breakout room. And so a very common concept is for instructors to say, okay, I want you to discuss a concept with your group, or here's a question. I want you to answer it together as a group, come up with an answer, you know, these are very common uses of the breakout groups. And so this is kind of like the next level. Like, what else can I do with a breakout group besides just discuss a concept or discuss the reading? Ask students to self-enroll in a group. And this is what we call four corners or more debate. So you can pose a statement or a question, and students have to vote. And so this is just an example, right? Public schools should never ban books. That's a statement. I didn't say it was my statement, it's just a statement. And you can ask students, do they strongly agree with that statement, mostly agree, somewhat disagree, or strongly disagree? And they'll use the self-enroll breakout group option to select their answer. So if they strongly disagree, they're going to join group 4. And they're going to see who they meet in there. They can also, discuss how they arrived at their answers. Sometimes people have the same answer, but for very different reasons. So this is a great way to actually even start a class. It's a good icebreaker. If you are tired of, entering silent synchronous sessions, this is a great way to get some energy flowing. Now, I'm a big fan of peer editing and giving feedback that doesn't just come from the instructor. Feedback is great coming from other people. You are not the only person who can give somebody feedback that is constructive and helpful. Now, not everybody likes peer editing and feedback. I have heard that this is a great way to generate misinformation. So I would say make sure it is a guided peer editing and feedback session. So some of the things that we can do, we can give them a rubric of what they need to accomplish, what type of feedback they have to provide. Or you can just give them a specific set of questions. Again, my brain always goes to English because that's what I taught. But, I might ask students to identify the strongest sentence in their rough draft. I might ask them to identify the weakest sentence. I might ask them to identify the thesis statement. So these are very specific questions that they have to answer, and it moves them away from saying, "Hey, I think you did a nice job," right? Like we want them to give very specific information. And sometimes I like to do peer editing and feedback sessions in a synchronous session in timed bursts, like a circuit. So you've got, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes to answer all of the questions on the rubric. And then we're going to switch and you're going to provide feedback for somebody else, right? So there's a lot of different ways that we can go about this. Um, but again, it takes the pressure off of you, I think, as the instructor to always feel like you must present and you must provide feedback. Here's an opportunity for them to provide feedback to their peers. And with adult learners, they have a lot of experience and perspectives that they can share and bring to enhance your course. You can also ask students to solve a problem. So, one way that you can do this is you can have a shared document. Again, I like to put mine in the shared drive, um, but I have different questions on that sheet of paper. Each group is responsible for a different question. Well, this can be particularly helpful maybe if you want students to build a study guide. It again pushes a little bit of pressure on the students that they need to complete this activity and they need to do so accurately because they're helping to build the study guide for the rest of the class. You can also do copies of the same document. So you can ask each group to solve a series of problems, and then you can come back together as a group and you can compare answers. Did everybody arrive at the same question? So again, it's that idea of filling in the study guide. And you can also give them some incentive, a race to completion. Is there a prize for finishing your worksheet quickly and accurately? And yes, there are other things that you can do besides, extra points in the course. Maybe for their next project, whoever wins gets their first choice selection for their topic. All right. I also like the idea of worksheets. So, what kind of worksheets? Well, I'm very much aware that we have all different disciplines, just even presented in our workshop today. So, you can have essay questions for students, fill in the blank, equations, graphs. You can have them create their own PowerPoints, or you can have them customize their own flow chart explaining a process. So, um, one of the things that you can do, maybe even in a Zoom session, is you can ask them to make their own flow chart in a whiteboard and they can save it and submit it to you, or that you can save it. And when you come back together as a whole group, as an entire course, they can share their chart. All right, this is one of my favorite ones. This came out, I think, a lot during the pandemic, but it really caught on. So this was the idea of a digital escape room. Now, this one was actually created by a library, and they showed how to create. It's a logic-based digital escape room, and theirs happened to be Hogwarts, which is Harry Potter. Now, they also included step by step how they did this. So you could create any theme that you wanted. Do I think that these require, yes, more pre-planning? Absolutely. Would I do this for every single course or every single synchronous session? No, no, I would not. But I do think that this can be very, very effective as a way to help students study and prepare for a large assessment. And this is regardless of field or discipline. I have created one in the past just to test it out. So I used Google Forms. Why? Because it was free. But it also has this ability to help you create customized learning paths. And by that, I mean it will ask students a question. And typically it's a multiple choice question. If they get the question right, they can move on to the next question, presumably a different topic or something that's a little bit more difficult. If they get the question wrong, then students are directed to a similar question so that they can keep practicing in areas where they need to revisit. It will also auto grade. So again, this is a really nice feature. You know, you can ask students to go through these escape rooms as groups or as individuals. And at the end, they'll get their grade. So really, it's a very effective way to help students, you know, study, prepare. I think a lot of us have been in courses that use Jeopardy sessions. So this is kind of just another flavor of that. All right, we're doing really good on time. Do I have any questions or anything, or do you want me to go back? Oh, okay. Other interactive activities. So if you have a synchronous session, one of the things that I like to do periodically is I might even cancel a regular class, but instead I might break up my class into, you know, 10-minute increments, and I'll ask students to schedule a meeting with me. So what we have learned is that even though many instructors offer virtual office hours, if it's not required, students are very tentative to come visit their instructors. So if you ask them or require them to come to your office hours, it can really be a great icebreaker, and they'll be more likely to visit you throughout the term or just to speak up when they have questions. So, you know, if you had them turn in a rough draft, maybe then they have to sign up to meet with you during mandatory office hours to discuss their next steps, their revision. So again, if you have a synchronous session, it does kind of lend itself to this idea that you can use one of those days, you know, for mandatory office hours because students have already blocked off their schedule. Other things, well, we were talking about, you know, how do I measure engagement? I like to use something that I call exit slips, and I'm sure they go by many different names. But I, again, like to make sure that at the end or somewhere close to the end of every synchronous session, I ask students to tell me a little bit about what they learned. And so these are just some of the questions that you could use. You could say, summarize today's lesson in one sentence. What are the main points from the lecture material? If you asked your students to watch a recorded lecture before coming to class, I might just give them this question like as soon as they come to the synchronous course. You know, hey, you were supposed to have watched the lecture. What did you learn? um, how does, you know, this lesson relate to current events? You know, where can they see examples of that in their own day-to-day lives? Where have you observed certain phenomenons in a social context. Or the last one down here at the bottom, I know this one is somewhat controversial. You could ask students, what could be improved about this lesson? But this is a great way to learn from your students. They might tell you, you know what I really enjoyed, or I wish we had more time for. And this could really help you kind of enhance that lesson so that students feel like they're being heard. So I do try to ask students some of these questions. And, the nice part is it can double not only just as a way to track their engagement. If they put their names on it, you can also use it for attendance. So, double duty there. All right, we also have the discussion waterfall. Now, I have a colleague who absolutely loves this feature. So you're going to set a timer. You're going to ask students to open the web conferencing chat tool. So all of you have been typing in the Zoom chat. So you're going to ask them to open that. And then you're going to provide a thought-provoking question. And you're going to tell students that they have to type their answer to the question, but they don't push enter until you give the signal. And so when you say, okay, everybody post now, everybody enters their answer all at the same time. And so you get a waterfall ripple effect. It's just kind of a nice way to see, kind of original posts without somebody, like waiting to see, well, what is everybody else going to type? So it's, kind of a very engaging, discussion without using microphones. All right, so I think I talked about this one a little bit. You have self-enroll groups, which are based on topic of interest, right? I don't know how many of you have used that or not, but you can find it, I think, in all of the web conferencing tools, whether it's Zoom, Teams, or Collaborate. So instead of you being the one to assign the students to a group, they can pick a topic and they can self-enroll. And you still have some control over that. You can say how many students are allowed to enroll per group. So if one fills up, they have to find something else. You could do the random group selection. I like that one a lot. When I get into class, some people might be absent. So I'm just going to do a random group selection, and it's going to take the students who came to class and is going to divide them up randomly. We talked about asking students to complete an activity. I like to mix it up. Sometimes I do it as a group. Sometimes I ask them to complete it as individuals. I really like the idea of asking them to create a concept map. And there's a lot of different tools for this, but a great one that you can ask students to use is a whiteboard if they're in Zoom. That's a great way to do it. Otherwise, they could map something out, in, well, a variety of different applications. If they like AI, you could ask them to use Canva. If they prefer PowerPoint, then you could have them share their PowerPoint slides. And of course, the other two, which we already talked about a little bit, is have them complete a worksheet or just develop a competition to incentivize students. Okay. So for some other activities, I tried to think of some things that take the pressure off of you where you feel like you're just lecturing into the abyss. Feel free to bring in an expert, bring in a guest lecturer. Students love hearing, from other people who are in the field. They love hearing new voices. So, it's a win-win for you and the students. Set up an electronic library day with the librarian. I think there is something for every field. So this could be really exciting for students. You can create a Shark Tank style competition and have a group panel review each group presentation or submission. So I've seen this with a marketing class. It was very effective. Each group was assigned a different product and they had to come up with a new marketing campaign. for each of the products, and they actually receive feedback from people who were employed in the field. The other idea here is we often think of students sitting in front of their computer, but they can go out into the field. They can, interact with their surroundings. So, additionally, one of the other things we learned from the pandemic is that students have a wide range of technology. Some people have a lot, some people have very little, but usually everybody has a cell phone. So you can ask students to go out into their surroundings and take pictures or recordings of things that they find. So don't be afraid to ask them to do things like that. You can also present some case studies to students, and I like to engage them, not just show them case studies, but show them a series and then chop off the end and ask students to predict the outcome. And then, after they've shared their predictions, you can actually show them the actual ending. And of course, we try to include activities that incorporate current events. And this I know can be difficult, say, for things like history courses, but if there's a way for you to incorporate activities that relate to students in their everyday lives, of course, this helps them retain information. I remember specifically one instructor received a grant, and I think she had students sign up to use virtual reality equipment. And students had a couple of different options where they got to experience a natural disaster. So they could pick a flood or an earthquake or things of like that nature. And she thought it really helped students connect with, the catastrophes that they were reading about in their history text. So you can be very creative. Okay. So we have about 15 minutes left, plenty of time. So I can get now to the technology tips because all of these are great ideas, but if you don't know how to implement them, then it's very frustrating. So if you want to create shareable documents, you can go to quick links, and I think there's Office 365. If they've changed the link, I can double check that very quickly. But this is right off of the NIU webpage. And so you just go to niu.edu, quick links, Office 365. There's OneDrive, My Files, add new, and then you can upload a Word document or create a new one. So those are really just the basic steps. Now I know sometimes our website gets updates, so I can double check and make sure that's the exact steps you follow. But the idea here is, if you had 5 groups, you could save the first document as group 1, the second one is group 2, and so on. So you have all these links to share with your students. And so this is the part where you create the shareable documents. So after you've created a Word document, you can return to your files. You click the 3 dots to the right of the name, whatever you saved it as. If you saved it as group 1, you'll see 3 little dots. You click on that, and then you click share with anyone, and can edit. And so the nice part is if they can edit, then they can type directly in the document that you created. All right, so some other tools that we can help alleviate Zoom fatigue. Kahoot. Anybody use Kahoot? It's just a fun way to survey people. There's Kaltura. Kaltura is NIU's licensed NIU's video platform. And I swear I'm not paid for this, but they actually have a free mobile app, and it works for Androids. It works for well, any device really. So you can again take recordings and upload it almost directly to your course, which is really nice. So um, you can use Canva. I don't know if any of you have played with Canva or not. You can create a free account. Canva is just huge. It is this website where you can create all sorts of things, infographics, podcasts, presentations, so many things that I'm sure I didn't even include in there. But I like to use it even as a student because they have all these different graphics for free. So when I get bored with all the traditional PowerPoints, I can create something in Canva. And of course, we have Padlet and Poll Everywhere. So we've got all these different tools. You can just try them out, see what you think. I wouldn't say try to use every single one of these tools all at once, but maybe pick one that appeals to you. All right. So what are the potential benefits of kind of revamping how we approach our synchronous online sessions? If we start thinking of ourselves as facilitators, we're enabling students to really kind of take control of their own education. Well, we know that our classroom is going to appeal to diverse sets of learners. There's going to be more interaction, even with self-identified introverts. Um, Introverts aren't people, I think, who are incapable of socializing. It's just that they usually prefer a more quiet approach. So the online environment can really help them navigate that. You'll be able to introduce other adult learner perspectives into your course. You have a lot of students who have real life experience. Maybe they have jobs and families, and so they'll be able to integrate that into your classroom. They'll be able to provide some insightful reflections about what they've learned, what they still have questions about, and what they think could help improve the class. And of course, for you, the final one here is this idea of pedagogy awareness. So you're really thinking about your lesson plans and what works, what doesn't work, and what you might try a little bit different next time around. And so again, going back to the University of Arkansas here, so somebody was describing their online course and they said, well, I get to know my students really well because we use a lot of written communication and they share details with me that they would probably never bring up in class. So I think that oftentimes goes hand in hand with the use of surveys. If you're feeling brave and you're willing to ask students for some feedback throughout the course instead of just waiting until the end when they fill out their course evaluations, you can really get some insightful feedback. Okay, so we made it with 9 minutes to spare. Is there anything that I can show you, or are there any questions topics you wanted to discuss? Anything at all? While I'm here, if you ever want to contact us, please don't hesitate to reach out. Email is a great way to reach me, but we have a whole team of CITL experts. And we also have one-on-one consultations. So if you ever just want to look at individual components of your course, we're happy to sit down with you in a virtual session and try to answer any question you can fire at us.
Megan, I do have one question. I
Yes.
love the idea of having a mandatory office hour so students can work one-on-one with us.
Mhm.
What would you do if there's more than, let's say, I have 40 students in a session and I wouldn't have how many hours, how long is that? 5 times 40. And would you recommend to have more than one mandatory office sessions? Like say for maybe 2 weeks in a row that we're just reflecting and reviewing what we have been doing and make sure that students are good on good track using those times. Would that be reasonable?
Yes, and I
Okay.
think there's, different ways you can go about it. You can ask students in a survey, like what are the best days that you're available or
Okay.
times, things like that. You can try to give them a couple of different options. So I like to use bookings to schedule virtual office hours. And so if you've never used that one, which I'm happy to help you set up, basically you pick several different days and times when you're available. And so they can see all of the options that you've provided. So, maybe I'll have like Monday morning and Tuesday evening, and then, like Wednesday, during the middle of the day or, something like that.
Right. So maybe for that week, instead of having a whole class meeting, we can have one-on-one check-ins.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you. I love that idea. It's very helpful.
That's a great question. And I usually try to meet with my students a couple times throughout the semester. I try to meet with them early in the semester just so that they get used to me right away. They know who I am. We're gonna talk, for a couple of minutes, welcome to the class. What brought you here? What are your expectations or hopes? That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And then sometime later on throughout the semester, let's talk about a specific project you're working on.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I appreciate that. I'm a new faculty, so this semester what I'm struggling with is even though I email some students request a meeting, and they still wouldn't join my office hour or respond to my emails. So I really think what I should have done is to connect with them very early at the beginning, and maybe that use that as a tendon point to meet with me one-on-one to start with.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to push our students really hard to to meet with us. I've had classes where students were silent, no matter what I did, they were silent. So I started sharing my screen, and I would just Googled a random name generator. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this. Um, but you type in all of your students' names and it spins around like Wheel of Fortune and it lands on a name. And that's the person that has to answer your question. Um, and students were fascinated. And all of a sudden everybody was willing to talk because they knew like, sooner or later, Wheel of Fortune, they were going to get called on. So,
That is so
um,
funny. I've done with small groups. That will be like, group one, you win the lottery, and it's your time to share.
yes. I mean, I'm personally, I think like I just let webcams be optional. I think there's a lot of equity concerns with it. So that's fine. If you don't want to turn on a webcam, no problem. But participation is not optional.
UDL, right? Multiple means of participation.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, if I have no other questions, let me give you back a couple minutes of your day. Thanks for hanging out with me on this cold autumn day. I appreciate it. And I'll hang around if anyone else has any other questions. But thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. You're most
Thank
welcome.
you.